A week ago, Israel was living a new normal, having pulled off a modern miracle by vaccinating nearly all of its adult population. The streets were filled, the stores were open, the shuls were starting to fill. Hope was in the air. We all know what happened then. The post-pandemic promise of a new normal crashed into the stark reality of the old normal. In Israel, back to normal means not only back to shopping malls and ball games, but back to running to bomb shelters and being called up to war. This week, as air raid sirens rang out and the rockets landed, I called my parents in Jerusalem to check in. While on the phone with them, I got a text that my cosmopolitan cousin in Tel Aviv and her 7-year-old would be unreachable. They didn't know for how long. They were headed to their building's bomb shelter, and they were running as fast as they can. A rocket having landed just down their street, right in the heart of the city. The next day, a nearby friend phoned my parents in Jerusalem. I suddenly remembered, that friend said, that this is your first matzav. Matzav is the word that Israelis use for times like these. The literal translation is situation, but the word, a typical expression of Israeli grit, contains so much pathos. The matzav, the situation Israelis face, is thousands of rockets launched periodically and viciously at civilian centers. The matzav that Israelis face is a conflict that seems to go on and on. This week, the unbelievable barrage of rockets launched by Hamas blanketed portions of Israel. Back to normal is back to existential war. Of course, the matzav is not just the war itself, but the accompanying condemnation of Israel that comes from pundits around the world and vilification of those who support Israel's right to defend her people. People like my cousin Tal in Tel Aviv, who grew up with a left-wing family advocating for Palestinian rights. People like Khalil Awad and his daughter Nadine, Israeli Arabs killed by indiscriminate rockets launched at Hamas's hands. Whether you are left or right politically, there is a simple question that this moment invites every one of us to consider. What would we do if this were our matzav? What would we have our leaders do if bombs were falling on Newton, on our children right now? No nation can or ever should have to live like this. And yet Israel does. 7 years ago, when Wayne and I were there with our Temple Emmanuel mission to Israel, rockets rained down on southern cities, terrified families sheltered in place. We watched trucks roll down the highway with tanks towards conflict as we held our breath. This week, as Wes and Shira are in Israel, rockets rain down on southern cities. Terrified families shelter in place, and they watched tanks roll down the highways, holding their breath. Back to normal. back to the matzav. Looking at our parsha this week, we might think the matzav has always been. Normal just means war. What do we need when we come into our land? An army. Our parsha counts all those eligible to serve. But there's another count we complete this week, the Omer. It is a count of homecoming that tells us that we are always in the process of becoming. And it calls us to use our Torah, the Torah we receive, to make of Israel a promised land. Normal in Israel doesn't just mean war, conflict, and critique. Normal means resilience. Normal means reaching out to others. Normal means renewing this eternal call. Wes and Shira wrote to our community this past week of their heartache as their beloved nephew Shaya's wedding to his bride Adi was canceled for now, postponed. Instead of standing under the chuppah, Shaya is returning to the reserves. As Shira shared with us, Adi, who she calls Didi, shared these words with her groom. We have to be strong. You have to be strong. Normal means resilience. As rockets threatened major Israeli cities this week, a call emerged from the quieter regions. Come and stay with us. After 15 months of coronavirus caution, families who had gotten used to living on their own, comfortable on their own, are now opening their homes left and right to help those in harm's way. Micha Goodman's Beit Prat put it beautifully. In this time of darkness, our community has asked itself, what can we do to infuse the world with more light? Alumni of Beit Prat organized an initiative to connect those with open doors to those in need. Within a day of the project going live, there were more than 500 replies, with double the number of people signing up to host than need to be hosted. And they are not alone. Young Army officers Yarona and Liron were scheduled to enjoy a honeymoon. And then came war. And so instead of returning to their honeymoon, they returned to their reserve units. They felt called to do their part. What would they do with the getaway that they had saved to enjoy together in a pastoral bed and breakfast up north? They posted on Instagram an invitation to any couple from the South who might be able to shelter there. Normal means reaching out to each other. Yesterday, at CJP's virtual rally, Nomi Nadich spoke about Jews and Muslims who are working together to build a different matzav, even under the pressure of this moment. She shared that she wanted to tell an unreported story of those who showed up Thursday night in Jerusalem, Haifa, and Tel Aviv, and 30 cities, villages, and towns in Israel, peacefully by the thousands. Arabs and Jews, together denouncing racism and violence and demanding a better future, one that affirms the humanity and dignity of all. Normal means recommitting to the ideals that ground us, working even in the midst of division to lay the foundation for hope. Normal is resilience. Normal is reaching out to each other. Normal is renewing our eternal call to build a better world. So what about us? We can accept the matzav as never-ending conflict and condemnation. We can wring our hands from afar, or we can tell this story of what normal can be. Because as the Omer teaches us, normal means moving the world one step closer to Sinai, each and every day. Shabbat Shalom.